Let's take a look at the included sampler within Bitwig, aptly named Sampler. And I'll be following this up with a series of tutorials that go into more depth on all the different parameters and features of this really cool device. So if you're someone who would like to learn more, the nitty-gritty of Sampler, then those will be on the way soon. Now, this overview is going to be geared for those of you who are just getting started with Bitwig or who may be curious about Bitwig and the included instruments and devices and how they function and what the features are that are included. So let's go ahead and just jump right into this. I'm going to press D on the QWERTY keyboard to open up the device panel, and then here to the left we have the plus, so let's click on that. And then we want an instrument, so I'll double click on instrument, and then we can see at the bottom we have sampler. So let's double click on that. Now just know we could also, from the browser, drag the sampler into our arrange view as well to access it. Let's close out that browser. Now if this seems a bit small to work with, as it seemed for me initially, just know that you can come up to the header here and right click and choose to increase the GUI scaling and make this as large as you would like. But for the tutorial, I'm just going to take that down one more size. And also know that we have a expanded device view button that we can click in the bottom left hand corner. So when we expand that out, we're going to see a large view of our waveform and some various controls that we can make use of in this window here. And we'll come back to this in just a moment. Now with Sampler, we can load presets, multi-samples, or individual samples from the included content or our own personal sample library. So let's start off with loading presets. So let's say that we'd like to load a guitar or piano or strings. We can begin by clicking on the folder here, and this is going to default to show everything here. Now it's taken some getting used to the browser within Bitwig. It's a lot different than within Studio One. So what I found is that if I'm going to load a preset into Sampler, I kind of disregard these first three columns and I come to the any category. And then here we can see we have bass, bell, brass, drone, drums. So this is easy to find what you're looking for, whether it's a pad, percussion, piano, and let's actually load a piano. So I'll click once to select that. The other columns update, and we can choose by tags, detuned, harmonic. We can choose by creator, and then here all the way in the last column to the right, we have the actual presets. So the one on the bottom is actually the high quality grand piano that's included in the Bitwig content. So I'm going to double click on that to load it up. Now, a lot of the sample libraries that are included with DAWs are kind of watered down, and I found them to be, a lot of times in the past, unusable in my own songs and productions. But what I found so far is that the included libraries and instruments, the presets for Sampler, are actually of a high quality. So let's go ahead and play back our piano. So that's a pretty good quality there. And you can see that this is a multi-sample instrument by looking in the display here. And again, as we saw a second ago, we can click on the expanded device view and have a better idea of what's going on. All of the samples that we have for this piano, these are separated by velocity. And this grand piano preset is actually 1 gig, so it's a pretty sizable. But let's go ahead and close this window out. And let's just take a second to get our bearings here. Again, this tutorial is for people who are just getting started in Bitwig or who may be interested. This layout is a lot different than what I'm used to in Studio One and a lot of other DAWs. I think Ableton Live and Bitwig have this kind of similar layout that's a bit different than if you're working with, say, skeuomorphic design samplers. So let's just take a look at the layout here. Now, if we come to the left-hand side on the header, we can double-click to collapse the sampler. We can show and hide the remote controls by clicking on this button here. We can show and hide our modulations by clicking here. So let's double-click to expand the sampler. And this is the sampler in its most bare form. Then again, we have the 2 buttons at the bottom where we can show our remote controls and modulations that have been assigned to the various parameters in the sampler. Now, what exactly are the remote controls? And we won't spend too much time here, but I just want to explain what these are. So these are going to be convenient kind of macro controls that we can use to adjust different parameters that they've been assigned to within our preset. So you can see we have high pass and low pass here. So we thin that out when we take up the high pass, low pass. So what are these actually controlling? You can see in the upper right hand corner we have note, release, and effects. And these are going to be included with the preset that we've chosen, the grand piano. So when I expand out the effects, we can see that we have an EQ here. So as I adjust the high pass, we can see that that makes the adjustment in our EQ, the low pass, that's going to adjust there. Just to give you an idea of where these are mapped to, we have controls for attack and release. So notice our ADSR panel here. The attack is going to be adjusted there, and the release. At the bottom, we have ARP and chord. So if I were to click once to activate the chord and press one key, we then have chords that are going to be triggered even though I'm pressing one key on my controller. Now these, the ARP and chord, are actually mapped to note effects. And we can see in the upper right hand corner, we already saw our effects. I'll click once to close that out. If we open up our note, then we can see we have a multi-note device. When I click on chord, then that's powered off. We then have ARP. Clicking, we activate our arpeggiator. So I just really want to make clear what's going on here and what everything is controlling and how it's laid out. So I'm going to go ahead and activate the chord again, and let's actually power that off and just listen to the arpeggiator. Okay, and we've got adjustments for our reverb and output here as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and close out our note effects panel and take a look at loading a multi-sample. So I'm going to click once on the header and just press delete on my QWERTY keyboard. We'll again click on the plus and come to instrument, load in our sampler by double clicking. Now in our display here, you can see that we have browse samples, multi-samples. So I'm going to click once here. We open up our pop-up browser, and in the upper right hand corner, we want multi-samples. So I'll click there. And again, as we saw when we were loading the preset, we have category. So for this, let's take a look at strings. I'll click on strings. Actually, let's choose orchestral. And these are all of the multi-samples that are available for that category. Let's double click on the pizzicato. And let's give this a listen. So again, good sounding samples. And if we click on the expanded device view, then we can see all of the individual samples that are loaded for this multi-sample. We'll close that out though. And one of the differences between loading a multi-sample versus a preset is that if we clear this out, we can clear out our samples and multi-samples by right-clicking in the display and choosing clear. Now, if I come back to browse again and let's choose our piano. This is our grand piano. I'll double click on that to load that up. Now when I trigger, we have the same piano samples that we saw at the beginning when we loaded the preset. But if you notice here in our note, release, and effects, these are all empty. So when we work with the multi-samples, it's going to be a bit different than the preset in that they don't have included note effects or effects that we can make use of. We can see that our remote controls are hidden. And when we do expand that out, these are going to be mapped to the controls within the sampler itself instead of any included effects or note effects. So for instance, our panning, if we adjust here, this is our panning in the sampler, then that's going to adjust that. Let's double click to take that back to the default. Okay, so this is going to be similar to working with the presets. It's just that we're going to load in a clean multi-sample without any effects or note effects applied. If we would like to apply effects, say reverb to this piano, then we can click on the effects panel. We then have the plus, which is blue. It's going to match the blue bracket, letting you know that we're adding an effect to the sampler device instead of adding it into the chain. So let's click on the plus. Here we have convolution reverb. I'll double click on that. And we now have reverb added to our multi-sample grand piano. If I'd like to choose a different preset for the convolution reverb, I can click on the folder, and then we have all of the available presets for it here on the right. I can click once to select, and I can use the down arrow to navigate between the different ones. And if I'd like to hide the effects that we've added to the sampler, we can just click on the effects button there, and then that's going to be hidden. We have one rectangle box here showing us that we have one added effects to this sampler. Okay, now let's move on to loading a single sample and some of the different parameters that are included in the sampler. So I'm going to click on the header, press delete. Let's again go through this same process. We want an instrument, sampler, and we start off the same as loading a multi-sample. So I'll click once. Within the browser, I'm going to collapse the packages because I want to choose from my own sample library, which is here. And I'm going to come to the drum samples, and I'd like Music Radar, the real world drum samples. We can click once to audition. Okay, so I'm just going to click OK to load that up. Okay, now let's get into some more of the nitty-gritty of Sampler and some of the really fun stuff. And let's actually make Bitwig full screen. There's no need for us to look at that Windows taskbar. Now, let's also go to the expanded device view, which I love. I love large waveforms. Don't ask me why. I guess I'm an audio nerd. But this is just one of the views that we can use if you find the smaller view down below or the view down below a bit small. Just note that the parameters and settings within the smaller delay in our device panel are going to be exactly the same as what we have up above. So we'll start with these controls, and I'm going to use the expanded device view up above, but just know that you can do the exact same thing within the display window below. So we've got our sample, and I'll go ahead and trigger just a baby rattle. And of course, with most samplers, we have our start and end markers that we can use to determine which portion of the sample is going to play back. When you have made your adjustments, if we double click, then you can see the display is going to show just that portion of the sample that is within our sample playback region. Double clicking again, then we zoom back out to show the entire sample. If we were to right click in an area of our display, we can choose to set the sample start. I'll right click here, choose sample end, so we can adjust the markers that way as well. Right clicking again, we can set a loop start and end. We can detect the root key using the frequency of the play region. We can convert it to a multi-sample, and we can also clear, as we saw earlier in the video. Let's go ahead and take our markers back to the very start and end, and then up in the very top left corner, we can see the name of our particular file. Here we have our key tracking. We can disable that, so when it's off, no matter what key I press on my controller, it's going to be at the same pitch. Turning back on. And then we have a percentage of that key tracking that we want to allow. We can then set our root here by click, hold, and drag up or down. We could also double click and then manually enter a value, press enter, and we can adjust the cents here. We then have gain control that we can click, hold, and drag to adjust. Double clicking, also we can enter a value. And then we have snapping for when we're adjusting our markers. So if you notice, while this is on, it will be highlighted blue when it's on. If I move the marker here, let's actually zoom in. I'm going to click, hold, and drag to zoom in. Now I click, hold, and drag down to zoom in. By default, you're going to have to click, hold, and drag up, but that didn't work for me, so I changed it in the settings to be the opposite. Now, you can see that that's snapping to the zero crossings, which should help with avoiding any clicks or pops when we're setting specifically the start marker. But if we were to turn this snapping off, then we can adjust this more freely, precisely to be wherever we'd like for it to be. But I'll go ahead and turn that back on. Let's double click and double click again to zoom all the way out, take this back to the end. Now in the bottom left corner, we can reverse. So I'll click once to toggle that on. Pretty straightforward. These are our start and end marker values, so we could click, hold, and drag up or down. We could also double click to put in a value. Same for the end marker. I'm just click, hold, and dragging. Now over to the right, we have our loop. By default, that's going to be turned off, but we can set the forward loop. By default, this is going to be the entire range. If you notice in the bottom left corner and the bottom right corner, we have these green flags, and this is what we can use click, hold, and drag to set a particular region. So I'll drag these to cover this portion here and trigger. Okay, and then once I release, it's going to stop looping. But if we were to take our release up, let's say at about almost 3 seconds, I'll press hold, then release, and it's going to finish out for our release time within the particular loop region that we've set. Now we also have a ping pong mode. So when I click here, this is going to go from front to back, front to back. And then we have the same fields as for our start and end markers for setting the particular loop region, the loop markers, click, hold, and drag, or again, double clicking and manually entering a value. We then have crossfade here. So if you have any clicks or pops in your loop, you can then click, hold, and drag to adjust the crossfade region. And if you notice in the display here, that's going to kind of show you how that crossfade is being adjusted. And I just want to reiterate that all of these controls that we just went through, again, if this window were closed, we could make all of these same adjustments within our display here in the device panel. And let's open up that expanded device view. Another cool thing, just because I'm a nerd, we can click on this up arrow in the upper right hand corner to detach that, move it to a second monitor, and maximize. I'll just maximize in this. But this is really cool. I love that. So we can click on the down arrow to reattach. And let's make our way down to the device panel and take a look at some of the other controls that are not available in our top display here. So very important, we have 3 different modes for the sampler. By default, we're going to be in repitch. So this works as any traditional sampler. So when the higher you play on the keyboard, the pitch will go up and it will play back faster. The lower you play on your keyboard, it will play slower and the pitch will be lower. Let's actually take our loop off. Okay, so we are all familiar with that, but we have a couple other modes. We actually have cycles. So this uses cycles of the source as a wavetable. So let's go ahead and activate that. And notice that our display here or up above hasn't changed, but if I actually zoom in, you can see that we have these vertical blue lines that pop up when we're in this mode. Now, when I trigger, we can hear that that's a little bit grainy, particularly in the higher ranges of the keyboard. But what we could do here is take the speed down. We have a speed control and take this down really low. Let's double click to show our whole waveform, and then we can just use the start marker to really choose an area. This is not the most exciting sample for working with wavetable, but I think you can get the idea here. We could also use this snowflake to freeze the playhead. Let's come to our effects. And let's put in a delay plus, as well as a convolution. Let's click on the folder for our delay and choose. And let's actually click on the folder here to change up to a different sample. Okay, this one has a bit more frequency information. And I'm going to change up the delay again. Let's double click on the header to close that out. Change up our convolution. Very cool. That's a lot different than what we started out with what the original sample is. Now, another cool thing that we could do is I'm going to press I to open up the inspector. Let's click on the header for our sampler. We can turn on voice stacking. Let's click, hold, and drag to take that up to 3. And we can click on the voice stack spread here. Just click that button, and then we can adjust some of the parameters here. Let's take the panning up a bit. So then our stacked voices will be panned. Let's also adjust the speed. Click to turn that off now that we've made the assignments, and re-trigger. Now we also have control for the formant here, so this is going to adjust the tone. Another parameter that could be cool to automate, or apply modulation to rather. Okay, now moving over to the right, we saw the freeze playhead function here. Now we have our offsets. So these are really good to, or could be good to add modulation to alter the playback of your sample. Let's double click to take that back to where the main start marker is. And let's activate our forward loop again. Bring in the markers, just to show that we have the same sort of offset for our loop. So if I come here and adjust, then we can offset that loop region, which could be another cool area to modulate, particularly with creating soundscapes. Let's deactivate our loop and take a look at the last mode that we have here in the sampler, and that's going to be textures. This is granular playback, preserving sample pitch. So let's select that. Let's take our play offset back to the default. Here we have grain control for the size of the grains. Let's actually power off our effects for the moment. And we actually still have our voice stack on for the panning. So let's clear that out. And I believe we also had that on the speed. So we'll take that off. We can adjust our speed for playback. Motion, which is going to give us some movement around the playhead position. And we also have our freeze. Very cool. But again, we're going to go through all of these different parameters and the different modes in much more detail in the in-depth series. So let's just power through the rest of the parameters here. We have a filter section, which most of us are aware of. By default, that's going to be off. Let's come back to the repitch mode and power our effects off. So we have a 2-pole low pass, resonance controls. Then we have a 4-pole low pass. We have 2-pole band pass, 4-pole band pass, high pass in the different modes as well. And then we have a notch filter here. We can turn on key tracking for the filter here, or adjust the amount of key tracking that we'd like for the filter. We then have ADSR controls that are going to be on by default, so a standard attack, hold, decay, sustain, and release. Now our hold and decay are grayed out because our sustain is all the way up at maximum. But if we were to take this down, which is essentially the level for our sample, once we reach the attack point, we can then set our hold amount, how long it's going to hold that maximum level, and then how long we want it to decay, or how long before it decays to our new sustain level. And we can actually hover here and make adjustments to the decay curve, click hold and make that adjustment. Hopefully you can see that in the video, as well as to our attack curve and our release curve. Double clicking, we take them back to the default of linear. We have this button here where we can assign this envelope to modulate other parameters. We would just click while it's flashing. We can then make the assignment, say to our play offset, and just take that up. Click once again, and now that assignment has been made. We can see our play offset is moving there. And we've already seen our note, release, and effects sections. We then have our panning, left, right. Double click to return to default. We then have velocity sensitivity here. We have our gain control. This is going to allow you to set the level before the sample audio goes into our effects. So this is pre-effects gain. Then this is our main out after our effects, any effects that we may have added. And the final thing I'll say is, if you ever get stuck or lost when you're working with Sampler, we have one of the most amazing help systems in Bitwig that I've ever seen. We can right click in an empty area or on the header of our sampler. Then at the bottom we have show item help. This is going to give you descriptions of each of the parameters contained within Sampler. So here we have our filter section. We can click on that to show its descriptions, our envelope section, and our output section. And we can actually make adjustments to these parameters in real time while we're using our sample. This is just absolutely amazing. So you can experiment, and this is going to help you learn better because you can read the description, make the adjustments, trigger your sample, and learn in an active fashion. You can also access that help menu while the device is selected. Click on the question mark up above, or click on show help if you have your inspector open. Okay, so I hope this has been helpful. It's been a little bit longer than I had originally intended, but we're still going to go into more in depth with sound design and working with these different features and parameters in future videos. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next tutorial.